Hi guys, my name's Gerred Blyth. So we're going to talk today for 45 minutes about what we're doing at ASOS with pattern libraries. I'm going to talk about pattern libraries generally, talk about the different types that are out there that we've been looking at, and then what we're trying to do, what our ambitions are, moving from a very visual approach to pattern library to more of a tech code base. And so to help me with that, I've got some of the guys who are actually doing the work in this, which is Laurence and Nyle. Theo's going to join us at the end as well for Q&A. Vicky might join us for the Q&A at the end, because really what I'm presenting here as head of UX and UI is a lot of other people's work, who are actually doing all the hard work. Nonetheless, enough about them, more about me. So about me, just briefly, I came into the UX through a fairly common route, I think, which is to start as a technical author. I was writing manuals. In this instance, it was for a CAD/CAM sheet metal cutting company. It's like a temp job. I was trying to be a journalist and writing manuals, and really had this epiphany where I thought it would be, why am I writing the manuals? Well, if it would be better to meet the engineers who are using this. Talk to them, get their language, find out their problems, write manuals more appropriately for them. So I met a few, and then the second epiphany is, well, why bother with a manual? Why don't you make the software better? Why don't you make the software work? It's hard. What a great idea. And my boss explained to me that's a thing, and that was user-centered design, and people do it anyway, and so I found a course and then went and did it. And so I've been agency side since, that was back in 2000. Agency side since, working for the likes of those kinds of companies, and I've been at ASOS for about a year. One note on the manuals, I wrote, I think probably 1,200 pages of CAD/CAM manuals for describing how to use this software. And I went to one of the engineers to find out how they used it, and this is how they used it. My hard work, a year of my life, just holding up their monitor. The other thing you need to know about me is the best thing I've achieved ever. I'm afraid it's not a pattern library. It was age 14, where I am at that point the sole author of the only existing Danger Mouse video game. And someone even filmed themselves completing this on YouTube, and I discovered that about 3 years ago. I never even completed it. It was very badly written, but it did look fun. That's it, that's me. And the other thing is, even in the weekends, I do show and stage design. I'm going to bring a few of the lessons that I've had in putting on shows and stage design into the pattern libraries. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about collaborating on the ASOS pattern libraries. I'm going to show you what it is, show you what we've done, but also I think the big story here is kind of how we're working on it together. There's no right way to it. There's lots of wrong ways, and we found some of those out, and I think we're kind of honing in on the right ways. So first thing first is to fess up to the elephant in the room. Who's been on ASOS.com in the last week or two? Show of hands. Okay, so you know what ASOS.com looks like. Is it a nice, coherent, perfectly well-designed expression of a nice type pattern library? No. Okay, and I know this exists. We know how bad this is. So beyond this main navigation, things do get a lot better. I am aware of how bad this is. The number of fonts that are going on in there, the number of sizes, the radically different spacing. It's a frustration. Got any timelines on how this has changed? Who's in the room? David or Hannah aren't here. Yeah, it's happening. We're months away from making this true to our pattern library, so I'm aware of this. Nonetheless, we have got some successes. And so this is an expression of what we call our M5 patterns. And so it's very handsome, very simple, a style that's coming to life across different platforms and using different platform conventions, so moving from web to iOS to Android. And so there is you'll see more and more of this over the next few months as things kind of go live and drop. However, there are still challenges in front of us. This is both live on the day that I started at ASOS, so this is the homepage and the My Account area. It's been a long uphill struggle to kind of correct those. My account's just about to be corrected. We're pretty close on that now. The homepage Vicky might talk about in Q&A is well corrected, and I think that's the thing that Nile's going to talk about as well. So we have different platforms at ASOS, different back-end platforms, and when we look at the style libraries, style guides style guides and pattern libraries. It's quite a nice thing to have. It's quite a nice thing to have different platforms because it means that we can try approaching it in different ways. We haven't had the ambition to have one single approach yet. So we're kind of honing in on that, having been able to test a few different things. So on the different platforms, we're able to solve these differently. Some other problems are first. So these are all live elements right now. So although things are starting to look nice in the world of checkout, in the world of my account, we still have a lot of things to deal with that are kind of like spewing out to different parts of the business. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. First things is to think about why. Why are we doing this? What's the point of a pattern library? And I would say, I've summarised there with these 5 things. Hopefully you can read. So to design quickly, so at ASOS we have UI designers, we have UI engineers, and designers work in Sketch. Actually, there's a show of hands, might be interesting. Who would, if I said designer or developer, who would consider themselves a designer? Okay, it's good, about 30%. And a developer is about 30%, leaving 40% as unknowns. So to design quickly, this is one of the main ambitions for a pattern library is for the designers to be able to produce screens quickly. Also to code quickly, and Nyle and Laurence are going to talk about that. I think one of the big stories, of course, is confidence that these elements work, that they've been proven, is that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we sit down and start to design a screen. Ultimately, this is leading to good user experience. But how good does that user experience need to be? This is one of the big questions. So if you look at a lot of these things, in amongst these, there are elements of good experience. They don't look the same, they're not from a single pattern library, but they are nonetheless within themselves good user experience. And I would say that probably the users often wouldn't even notice some of the differences and would be able to click on one type of spinner and a different type of spinner and not even notice and use them both readily and easily, and it'd be a good user experience. So what are we actually trying to achieve by aligning these? Is it just to serve our designers' OCD, or is there something else going on? And I would say that the simplest version of that is that we want the users to be reassured that the site is legitimate. It is ASOS. It's the right version of ASOS. They're in the right place. It can be a good user experience, but if it looks slightly different in different places, then there's kind of nagging loss of confidence that you're in a good version of ASOS or even in the right version of ASOS. So that's kind of where we're coming from, is the motivations behind why. So I want to talk about 2 pattern libraries that we've referenced. I'm sure everyone's familiar with some of these. So this is the NASA style guide. So it's a very visual style guide. Has anyone seen this? Anyone got a version of this? They kind of did a crowdfunding Kickstarter to re-release it, to re-release it. Has anyone come across that? It's really good. So I did a project for a band, and we kind of referenced it. And yeah, it's fantastic. It's like really kind of old school, very simple visual references. That's at one end of the spectrum. Then we get into this, which of course is probably very familiar as Bootstrap. So this is a very code-based style guide. And has anyone used Bootstrap? We've got a few users here, I'm sure. So very code-based, and again, very simple. It's very expandable. It's popular for a reason. And then the new kid on the block, I guess, is material design. So I think material design has landed really well, and it's one of the things that we're looking at combining with what we want to do, our ASOS native style, and it's quite interesting ways that you do that. I think they've done a great job. It's coherent, it's complete. It's coherent and complete in a way that you can probably only achieve if you're selling half the world's advertising, and you have the number of people that can just sit back and do this day to day. But it nonetheless is very good. I'm going to play a little video of the material design introduction. Which I enjoyed, mainly just in a really narky way though. So this is, has anyone seen this video, making the material design? I'm just going to play the first minute or so.
What is material design?
You'll probably have to ask me this a couple times.
So material design is a system for designing interfaces.
Material design is a design language.
Material design is a design system?
Material design is a new perspective on what the human and device relationship can be.
Maybe it's too complex of an idea.
Material design is this design philosophy that's really trying to acknowledge the technology behind the interface.
It's a way for designers to collaborate with users.
Material design is a way for designers to get what they want.
So it is a good pattern library. It is a good expression. I kind of feel like the way they talk about it is that they found the Holy Grail. So it's unbelievable to them that this thing could exist, whereas in reality it's just a little bit like paper stacking on top of each other. That's really what it is. I thought I'd missed it. I thought I completely misunderstood what material design was. And I read it and I kept looking at it, I kept reading it. It's like, no, it's just a little bit like paper stacking on top of one another. That's material design. Okay, but it's definitely a good reference for us. So the types of systems that we have here at ASOS, I guess we have three things. So the first one is reusable elements for designers. The second thing is reusable elements for developers. And also we have kind of an element of guidance and documentation. So rather than just an actual reusable component, it's telling you why you should use it, how you should use it. And our challenge is, and this is what we're trying to achieve, is how to bring those three things together. I think we made a relatively good stab at it as we've been going on. This is an interesting quote I thought from Italy Friedman, who talked about, is this too ambitious to try and bring these three things together? So if you can't read at the back, copywriters will create separate voice and tone style guides for the interface copy. Visual designers will maintain a large sketch or Photoshop master file, the main interface screens. And marketing managers will keep nifty, cheat PDFs and ad sizes and marketing material in a shared Dropbox folder. The things I can mention there, of course, is the dev side of it. So even for those three audiences, they're all trying to have different things from a very similar repository, and they're all trying to keep them in different places. And I think that's something that we've noticed here. Are we being too ambitious to try and bring all these things together? One of the indications of that is, as this project has gone on, the way that we talk about it as a team. What was initially a UI toolkit, then became a UI style guide, and then became a pattern library, and then at one point became a pattern lab, and then became a dev lab. And it's just, the team's thinking as it went through that kind of odyssey changed, and we're kind of now floating around this point trying to work out exactly what we're trying to do with this. Some references that you might be familiar with. Hands up if you know Brad Frost's atomic design model. Okay, that's good. That's a good show of hands. So this is definitely, it's obviously a good reference point around the industry. It's coherent, it's conceptually coherent, and it's very valuable. The guys at General Electric, GE, have written up a really nice revision of this, which is to recognise the problems with the atomic design model is that it's atomic. It doesn't have a grand vision of any design screen. So you're building things from bricks. I guess it's the same reason why you wouldn't just have a builder or a civil engineer build a building. You'd also want an architect. So you need both, coming from both sides. You need all the different parts of that story. If you're just coming from atoms and building up, it kind of feels nice. It feels like a conceptually tight thing to do. But the reality is, it doesn't then lead necessarily to a good user experience. It just leads to consistent atoms. So General Electric looked at their approach of principles, and they kind of did this mapping of how Brad Frost approached things and how they now think of things, and principles and more to the guidance around how to use the atoms. And that was pretty useful too. Spotify, as is their want, went further from principles. So if you actually look at, is anyone familiar with the GE Predix system? Someone looked at that? That's really worth a look. A couple of that. It's really worth a look. So they've done a lot of work, but actually when you look at their principles, they're still very, very atomic. They're still very specific in what they're describing. It doesn't really have the vision that you might need. So Spotify, as is their want, went from principles to principles, proper principles. So this is how Spotify think about it in their glue style, right? So they have their 6 principles, and this is it. So this is how they gauge whether their designs are kind of on brand, on Spotify brand. So they're quite vague. Do less, content first, be alive, get familiar, stay authentic, and lag on, which I think is the sauce you get in IKEA at the end. I think. It's a Swedish word. It's Swedish.
Not too much,
Not too much. Not too much. Not too much sauce.
just about right.
Just about right now, sauce.
Logan Berry.
Sorry?
Logan Berry.
Logan Berry. Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I know. So another nice quote around this is again from Mr. Friedman, which is to talk about the difference between the limits, I guess, of that atomic design thinking. Is design doesn't emerge by seeing or thinking components. It needs perspective and point of view. It needs kind of the architect or the guiding principles as well. One other concern I have with Spotify's glue system, and obviously it's doing a good job, but Spotify is starting to feel like a really, really strong user experience and a consistent user experience. But even if you look at the way that they're describing their principles, they talk about them two ways. So they've got these 6 principles. They also say whether their elements are in tune, so T-U-N-E, and which is nice and it feels kind of musical and it feels like Spotify. But now you've got 2 things. So is the tone right? Is it usable? Is it necessary? Is it emotive? But also, does it do less or is it alive? You've got 2 kind of things conflicting when you look at things at a very high end. So that's the landscape of what we looked at. So I'm going to come into this and the kinds of things that the team were thinking about. And so I'm just going to now talk about how we've done it, so our approach. And to be fair, it's really our approaches. One of our references for this is a fantastic book called Messy. Has anyone read this book? No one? Does anyone know Tim Harford? His name's at the bottom, it's difficult to read. Bottom something like that. So Tim Harford's the guy who does more or less on Radio 4. He's the FT kind of economist, behavioural economist, and he's got a fantastic book. And there's so much in it about Messy. And one of the guiding factors from Messy is if you try and control things too much, not only will it be difficult to do, it might even be counterproductive. So it's actually not a bad idea to allow for some mess, to allow for a bit of chaos, and allow for different approaches to bounce around amongst each other and conflict. And out of that will become a greater emergent truth, better design or a better outcome than if you had overly controlled it from the start and hadn't allowed for any change or mess. So it's kind of retrospectively what we've done. At the time, it didn't necessarily feel like that. We were just doing lots of stuff, and now we're going to say that we did it in a messy way on purpose. So some of the things that we've done are kind of seem to conflict and seem to run counter to each other, and actually it's led to quite good thinking. So I'm going to bring up a bunch of principles, and this is really kind of, as I said, it's not about the final end product. I'll show you where we are with that. It's more about trying to work out how we get to that. So the first thing to talk about is empowerment. So I think it's really inappropriate for someone to come in and dictate the design system and design this is how it needs to be. So the thing that we focus on really is empowering different people around the business. And in the team that I work with is the UX and UI team. I think there's about 20 people in there, or 18 right now. And it's really about empowering all those guys to come in from their own way. We'll take the best bits, we'll prune out the bad bits, and we're trying to get people to collaborate rather than it kind of top down. This is the new style guide. This is what we need to work towards. In doing that, then you get the problem of transparency. So then you need to be very transparent. You need to make sure everyone, when they are working on these things, they're exposing it to one another. Everyone's seeing what they're working on. So that's something that we focus on. To skip over to this point, through our design consistency session. So every week, normally, we kind of sit down and refer to all the different patterns that we're using, all the different elements that we're using, and checking them, using them consistently, seeing who's in something new and trying to wrangle that back in. And it's an ongoing process, which has come back to my well-ordered third point. So it's a process, right? So it's rather than it being a finalised reference, rather than it being a chiseled in stone style guide, it's more about increasing consistency week to week, and making sure that we're trying to be more consistent than we were last week. And so that's when you've got quite a disparate team, as we have at ASOS, we're working on different things, and actually day to day, we don't necessarily have much close contact on the individual projects. That's kind of an important thing to look at. Going back to empowerment is this idea of the anti-overlord. So the idea of design overlord, and I've already given away my joke, which is there is no I in UX UI team. Thank you. And then another exercise we go through is what we call ASOSify. So I'm going to jump to what that is. So ASOSify is something that we do with the team, which is to take the pattern library as is, and take a wireframe. We've done it a few times. So the first time we just took a generic page from eBay mobile web, and we ASOSified it. We made it our own, for our own patterns, our own styles. The more recent one we did was based on a neutral wireframe, which we made up a fake wireframe. And in fact, one of the guys gave a great job is to make the shittest wireframe you can. I made it on purposely bad, and he really struggled with it. He's too much of a pro, but he finally did it. And then the whole team took it. So UX architects and UI designers, the two roles, and everyone took this on and tried to ASOSify this wireframe. I'm going to show you a few examples. It's not going to be legible from the back necessarily, but it kind of doesn't have to be. So this is the neutral wireframe that was provided, and these are 5 different people's approaches. And it's not about getting the right result, it's not about who won, it's not about who did the best job of applying our pattern library, but it's more about the notes that they take at the time and then deliver back to the team, and to kind of expose the difficulties they have making those decisions. Why did they use this element over that element? Why did their colleague use something else? Why did someone put this map spacing? Why did someone put something else? And so we can start to really draw out the what's missing in our style pattern libraries. So that was a mobile web version. So that was an iOS version, and then looking at desktop web, I'm doing the same thing. So different people approaching in different ways, and happily you start to see some big consistency, and then when you start to see inconsistency, that's when you kind of go back to the style pattern library and try and work out why. So that's the ASOSify method. The other thing I think is important to talk about is pragmatism. So it's again going back to, are you trying to have something that's perfect and trying to have something that's immutable in truth and can always be referred to and unchallenged, or are you going to do something more like the 80-20 rule, which is actually 20% of the effort in a style guide is probably going to get 80% of the consistency we need, and that's actually a better use of our time. We're all working on day-to-day projects. That might be a better way to be pragmatic about this. Also, if you think about it as an ongoing process rather than a final piece, it starts to become a pattern library process rather than a product. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about the 2 libraries that we're currently looking at. So we have different platforms, as I said. The first one I'm going to talk about is the content platform. I'm going to hand over to Nyle in a moment to talk about how he's approached this. The first thing we did with the content platform is work in Sketch. So hands up if you work in Sketch. Further hands up if you know Sketch. So it's certainly become the tool of the moment. I don't know what Adobe are doing about that, but they don't seem like they're catching up very quickly. So we don't have Sketch on this laptop, but we shared everything in Zeppelin, which is Sketch's best kind of collaboration tool. Should have done this on the way in. Okay, so this is these are our Sketch artboards. So this work is done on the content platform. So we're looking at the home page and the hub pages and kind of the content inside rather than the core shopping experience, which we'll look at next. So on the content platform, this is the way Zeppelin presents it. So we actually started to think about using Zeppelin as a way of just communicating our pattern library because it is quite effective. It does have a lot of qualities. So if you come into here, of course, you can actually select the text, and it gives you all the parameters around that text. We found that they are not accurate enough. So they're actually kind of they're introducing problems. So then started annotating things in here rather than using that. So it's kind of making a bit of a mockery of what Zeppelin is. But nonetheless, it's an effective way to share a simple deck like this. And then so we're looking at simple elements and then starting to have a certain level of verbosity around that and talk about why you use them, and then moving from those atoms into the molecules of components and how they kind of stack together and how you have them out. So that's kind of what we did first. We did it in Sketch, communicate it in Zeppelin. I'm going to hand over to Nyle, who's at the back, who's going to then talk about how we move from there into the dev side of this. to fire you up.
Hello. So I'm Nyle. I'm a front-end developer on the content platform team. So I'll just full screen that. So essentially the content platform team is the team that sort of looks after most of the pages that are content manageable. So we look after things like home pages, sort of landing pages for jeans and things like that. Sorry, just tell me if I'm not speaking to the mic. So in our team, we sort of had this problem that every time a new project came in, we were sort of, reinventing the wheel. And basically got a bit sick of rewriting the same things again and again, especially if they're custom components from the design team that aren't sort of standard browser elements. So what we did was we created the Creative UI library. It's called Creative because we're sort of a creative sub-team in content platform teams. It's no more creative than anything else. So what is it? So at the moment, the UI library, it's an NPM package. About 30% of you are developers, so I'm not sure how many of you know what an NPM package is. But essentially, it's a package that when we're setting up projects, we can just install and sort of pull these standard components from. So they're all style guide compliant. And one of the important things is that all of the components are discrete. And by that I mean that once we pull them into a project, they don't output any code unless we sort of initialize them. So we always have that package there that's readily available inside a project. So how does it work? Essentially, let's take the homepage project that we've just redone. So essentially, let's say we want 5 of the components, which might be some buttons, some header text, some copy, and then we want 6 what we've called modules, which are groups of components. So we might want like an article feed from the editorial team, or a nice carousel or something like that. So let's say we want all those things. We build up our sort of project locally. The unique thing about our team is that we use a content management system, so all the templating happens within the CMS. So we build sort of a dummy template locally. And then from there, we'll test it all locally, get it working, push it to our build server, whether it's dev, test, in prod. And in that build server, we'll have a package.json, which will basically tell us which version of the UI library we want. So let's say we want 1.17.3. And that'll just install whatever version that project wants, and then that can get released. Now the good thing about this is, if the project never changes, so it always needs those 5 components, those 6 modules, the project never has to change. We just set up a config in that, and we don't have to worry about it. But then let's say all the things in that project, let's say we improve the accessibility or the styles, or we just change it. We can just update the UI library and then update the package.json to with what version of the UI library we want, rebuild the package, and then that'll go out to release, and we can test it and get it out into production. So it saves us a lot of time, and it's a much nicer way of working because, like I say, we're not constantly rebuilding things. So I'm not going to show you any code because it's probably quite painful for you to sit and look at. This is essentially a little playground that we set up. It's just a little Azure server. And these are all our components. So you can see we've got a color palette, we've got some typography stuff, form fields. And this is literally just for us to basically try and break the components that we've built. I think that's about it. We've got some carousels down here we've built. And as well as components, we also started building groups of components, which we've called modules. So these will be mainly things that you'll find on the homepage. So we've got these marketing units that we call them, ad slots, what we call moments. Again, they're not very pretty, they're not really for anybody to see in reality. So this is sort of so in the project, once we install the library, we instantly have access to all this without having to rewrite anything really. We just sort of initialize what we want. So, why create the library? First of all, to increase the consistency of the UI across ASOS. Reduce the design and development time. Everything only has to be built once, tested once in the same project. Reduce QA and UAT time. So, because it's always the same code, QA have a lot more confidence in what we're building. So I mean, it should be thoroughly tested, but we know what's happening with them. We can strive to get close to perfect components because it's constantly the same code again. You know, we can constantly improve the same thing instead of rewriting it from scratch every time. If there are any fixes or updates, we can roll them out to multiple projects quickly. So on that, let's say we had a component, take the article feed for example. In the old world, we'd have it on three different projects, and it'd take 3 people or a lot of one person's time to go and update them all with a fix or an update. Whereas now, all we have to do is update the UI library, and that can instantly go out to 3 separate projects. But on that, so half of you probably think that's a great idea because it triples productivity, and half of you probably think that's a terrible idea because we create 1 bug and push it to 3 projects, which is true. So to try and sort of combat that, we have put some safeguards in place. So first of all, the components and modules are very strictly scoped to themselves, so there's nothing, well, obviously nothing global, but they don't rely on each other. Everything's contained within the components themselves. We've introduced Git flow in this project, so we keep our release and our development streams separate. As part of that, we also do pull requests and code reviews, so everything's always looked at before it gets released. Proper semantic versioning on our releases, so like I say, when we go from 1.17.3 to 0.4, we don't release major updates when breaking changes as minor updates. Manual package update process. So if we do create some updates, it's not that they instantly go out everywhere. If we want the updates to go to a project, that project has to be updated. It's not an automatic thing. So if we want to keep one project on version 1, we can do. And we also perform sort of 2 levels of QA. So one centralized in the UI library itself in that project. And then once it's gone into a project like home pages, it gets QA'd there as well. So the next steps for our creative UI library, convert everything to ES6. So at the moment, it's just sort of standard ES5. So we want to get Babel added in there, convert it to ES6, and then that'll allow us to start introducing React, Webpack 2, start maybe introducing Redux for some of the data-driven stuff. And from there, we can start to merge with other teams that are already working with React. So it'll sort of bring us all in a bit more in line. And that's it from me. That's the creative UI library.
Thanks, Nyle. Okay. Your own round of applause. Okay, just gonna carry on then. So thanks, Nyle. So we're going to look at the one of the other platforms we're looking on, which is with the core platform. So this is now something that's moving into React. So we're approaching this in a similar way. So we started visually. We started with a sketch file, and this is the sketch file. So I don't have Sketch on the laptop, but I'm just going to jump into Zeppelin just to show you how that's rendering. Nyle tells me how to not full screen that. There you go. Okay, so again, Zeppelin is good and bad features. It's a great way to communicate things, but it does just present everything as a rush of information, a rush of patterns. But when you go into here, you start talking through the individual elements that all of the guys use. So obviously the value of this is a sketch file is the designers can grab it and use it straight away, not from Zeppelin but from Sketch. And then it's just a nice place for everything to be consistently pulled together. And this is a great labour of love. This is something that kind of happened as part of a project rather than before or after. This idea of kind of consistency coming through process rather than a standalone document or a standalone deliverable. So this is the initial sketch file that we used. Moving from that, we then said, well, what are our ambitions for this? Where do we want to go with this? And the main thing was to start to bring all of our patterns into one place, whether it's on web, iOS, or Android. So we started to create a kind of a vision for that. As we started to use the content from those sketch files, we obviously now have 3 sketch files, one for iOS, one for Android, one for web, and we started to bring them together in in kind of a vision piece. And so this was rendered out like this. So you're going to struggle to read this from the back, I'm sorry, but this is the ASOS pattern library. At the top here, we have, on the left here, we have all the different sections that you might want to refer to, and then the content itself in here. And then you can jump around, look at how buttons are designed, and how look at lists are rendered, tabs, etc., just as you'd imagine it would be. And at any point, the idea from here was you could move from one platform into another, so move from web into iOS, and everything kind of retains the same, so you can see how things change across different platforms. And that was trying to bring all these things together. So this opens up a lot of questions. The first one being, would the web and the iOS team want the same place to hold their code repositories? And the answer is, I think, resounding no. It's a very difficult thing to achieve. I don't think anyone, that's really being kind of, getting to that point of what is the pragmatism that we're looking for here. So we kind of, we talked about that a lot and steering away from that now. And looking at the next generation as being mainly web focused and using iOS and Android areas to visually reference things. So we're happy that it's bringing everything together visually. We know that we now have a nice coherent ASOS style across all those platforms. And it happens to have the web code in it, ideally, but it doesn't necessarily have to have the Android and iOS code or any kind of coding references in there. So that's kind of our demonstrator for that. We made some changes since. A few other things that came up in this is that if we're looking at actually bringing code in, obviously you now have a 2-column design, so if you're doing any responsive elements, then you kind of stymie yourself from the off because things won't be behaving in the browser as they normally would. So we moved on to a single column design using the same elements, and if you can see at the top here, you definitely won't be able to see this at the back, so same kind of thing, jumping between the 3 platforms, and also making some quick adaptations for web responsive viewport size, and also there's an option here to turn code on and off, and that is what we're going to have now. Laurence come and talk about.
Hello. My name's Laurence. Work on described as the core experience. So can everyone hear me without the mic? If I talk a bit louder. No. Can everyone hear me now? First time on the mic. So I've been working with Dom, who's at the back, and Theo and Gerred, obviously, to look very much from a developer's point of view about using a pattern library. So we've seen kind of why it's useful for design. It's useful for the wider business as well to see the different elements that we use. But how do you get this adopted and how do you keep it alive? Because currently we have Zeppelin, and that's used by the checkout team, by the product page team, bags, saved items, lots of different teams, and they want their one source of truth. How should this design look? So if we're going to replace that with our own website, then it needs to be something that people are going to fully embrace, they're going to respect, and it needs to stay up to date, and it needs to, it just needs to achieve a broad adoption. So one of the things we've been looking at is convenience. So if you're going there and you're getting your code from there, then you want that to be a really convenient experience. On simpler projects, that could be a case of the code being right there, you copy and paste it, and you put it wherever you need it. But with lots of different teams, I see a few developers I work with in the audience thinking, right, what's being introduced here? We're very cautious that we don't want to tell every developer in our platform, this is the markup, these are the styles that you need to write in order to implement this design feature. But we do want to consider that, like, how would that be possible? And the way it can work on a smaller team is you do your development work in the pattern library, hence the idea of calling it a lab, calling it a development lab. So if you need a new component, you build it in the dev lab, it's immediately documented, it's immediately available to other people, and then you just sort of use it in the different places that you need to use it. With more teams involved, that gets increasingly complex, and a simple button might be perfect in one context, it might look the same across different teams, but have different code implementations. So this is a work in progress. It's not something we're doing sort of all day, every day. It's just something where we're planting a few seeds. For now, we're focusing on getting the design look kind of available through a website. And then we're going to introduce the option to turn on code. Just to give you an example, we've got a knockout legacy platform. We've got a whole load of new React stuff. So just there, you would have different code implementations for the same features. So it's an awful lot to think about. We're thinking about versioning and platforming. You know, do we do something similar to the content platform and have NPM modules that allow you to include these elements from the pattern library into your project? So a lot going on there. I've only got one more slide, and it's just further consideration. So there's a lot that we've already considered. I've mentioned a few of the further considerations. So how to share this resource amongst the developers and kind of how to keep that versioned is very important. With these design components in isolation and with the code actually driving them, there's the potential for you to do your testing there. So a lot of QAs would love to be able to test individual components, modules in isolation, know they're going to always behave in exactly the right way. And my last point there is Storybook. So I don't know how many of you have worked with React, but there's something that we're going to look into a little bit more, which is the React Storybook, which does a lot of the sort of stuff I'm talking about here. And it describes itself as a development environment, but it also provides kind of reference to all of the components that are used in the project. So yeah, there's a load of ideas about what we're working on.
Thanks, Laurence. Okay, let's go finish off with I think just maybe one or two more slides. So we're moving forward from here. What's the plan? So as Laurence said, I think we're going into this with our eyes open. We're very aware of the failures that we might encounter. We've seen it. It's documented online. People talk about it. We've all been part of it at different companies before now. We've all had ambitious plans to kind of bring everything together, and then everything starts to kind of get into trouble. So we're going into this with our eyes open. I really like this quote from Twitter at Gina. So this is a quote about zombie stuff. So Gina said, zombie style guides, they're style guides that aren't maintained and part of your process. They die and rot, they eat your brains. And I think I've seen this happen before, where you put so much effort into it and you focus on the end result and not the process and not the maintainability and not the engagement, and it becomes this thing that was great once and now it's become actually more of a problem. There's another really interesting book. Has anyone read this book, The Craftsman, by Richard Tennant? So, has anyone read this? Great book, great book. So there's one of the driving forces behind this book is the idea of the craftsman, of someone crafting something of value of its own cause. So they're working on something in order to service itself, because it's an attractive thing to work on, because it's an interesting problem to solve. He references the atomic bomb and the guys in the Manhattan Project working on that. I'm not saying that our style guide goes so badly that it's anything like the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb, but the idea that you're heading towards something because it's a nice problem to solve, because we want to solve it in a really nice way. As designers, we need to scratch that itch and have everything be really consistent. We want to show our friends that we've got, or our design colleagues, we've got this amazing style guide. We want to put it online and have it referenced. As from the code side, something that was great once, and actually now the platform's changing, moving around, and actually it's becoming less useful. I think we need to be very aware of why we're trying to do this. Is it just to have a really good pattern library, or is it actually to solve the problems that we have as a business? And that's just then to go back to the very first slide I put on, which is these are the problems that we have as a business, right? We want to be able to design things quickly as designers, we want to be able to code things quickly as devs, we want confidence these elements work, generally a good user experience, and actually it's really about making users reassured that the site is legit, it's working well. If there's elements of inconsistency in there, but nonetheless we're still meeting those things, and maybe we have done what we need to do. We don't need to have a Manhattan Project style, Uber style guide. Actually, we can achieve this through process and small wins rather than one huge, big, overarching style guide. So I think that's everything I want to talk about. I've got some open questions on the next slide, but maybe they'll come up in the Q&A. I'm not sure what the timing's looking like. Whether we wanted to...
Maybe 5 minutes.
We do a 5-minute Q&A?
5 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to... Well, look, here's your start of 10. These are some of the questions that I have still as a project, so I'm going to hide those out. And yeah, we'll do 5 minutes. I don't know if Lawrence is going to come back up. Nyle, we could do 5 minutes. Theo might join us. Theo works on some of this as well. Vicky might even join us if she's got the... she's around. And Dom's at the back, he's lurking. Dom might join us. Yeah, look at that, very good. Okay, so where's Theo? Is he in the room? I think he's going to pizza. Look at that. That's good job, Vicky. Okay, so hopefully there are some questions now. I could have got like a weird boy band up here. So thanks for your time. Any questions?
I have a question. I wrote down, but I can't remember what reference I was in reference to. It was more to do with moving forward. In day-to-day business, obviously, it's hard to organise projects where you gave them the platform to design it themselves. Like, you had like different colours, like banners and stuff like that, and then they produce their own slides, or not slides, but their own web pages, and develop them that way. Like, and obviously, that isn't giving like a direct business like development. How do you find that? How do you prioritise that in a day-to-day business?
Yeah, the prioritisation of this is a good project. So that's one of the things we stumbled against is we tried to do it with Sketch and Zeppelin, we tried to do it with PDFs. I mean, let's not pretend that didn't happen. You know, just sharing PDFs and having a single PDF. And we found that they're all ineffectual, and the pattern library kits that are out there, like patternlab.io and those things, they weren't really serving our needs either. So, well, someone has found time to do it, and these guys are kind of making time, so I'm going to maybe hand over to talk about how we actually move from the idea to making something live.
Yeah, so, well, with ours, it was essentially, I sort of joined the company and built my first project, and then moved on to my second project and realised I was building the same things again. So I just sort of invested the time during that project to say, I'll create it in a third project that then can feed into everything else. And to be honest, moving since then, I think it saved me a lot of time at least. So I think it's well invested.
Okay. Dom might have something to say about structuring some resource around things like this.
Is your question about prioritising this project or about prioritising assets for
I think prioritising assets in general, especially like web development, because it is so slow and things just get discarded so quickly when it goes wrong.
To be honest with you, I don't know if I've got the answer to that. I think Gerred sort of suggested that we're kind of feeling around. It's more about questions, really. In fact, this is one of probably loads of sessions where people are going to give their opinions about what will and won't work. At the moment, one thing that we haven't talked about is how what platform we're actually building the pattern library on, and that is basically we're looking at the technology that we're going to actually be promoting and the technology that we're actually going to be using going forward. So we're building the whole thing on the next gen technology stack. So it's all going to be React and we're going to be using CSS modules, and we're going to be trying to keep as close to that as possible. As far as what goes in the pattern library first and what's probably going to be most useful, don't really have an answer. We're actually just looking at the things that are most practical to actually deliver as a sort of minimum viable product. And so it's kind of just like, we're going to choose things like palettes and typography and things like that initially. And then moving forward, we just build it up very, very slowly. I don't think we are going to define that comes from whether it's used and how it's used.
Okay, I've got some questions from the audience. One for you guys. What type of CSS framework are we using to keep components from interfering with each other?
So I sort of started mentioning that. So we've got CSS modules. just generally, hopefully it would be fairly agnostic. So we would just follow the principle that components should be scoped within themselves. So there should be no cross-pollination between components. So that's the principle, overriding principle. So, but as it happens, we're using CSS pretty much vanilla CSS. I think that's what we'll be presenting. So that if you were wanting to use SAS, for example, you could then convert to SAS. So I think from that point of view, we're not really going to dictate.
But because we are talking about React, right, componenting, so that's why I explained.
Well, the markup itself is going to be built in React, and they'll be pretty dumb components. I think most of them will not have an awful lot of logic in. Will be fairly simple.
Yeah, I've got grab the microphone. I've got there's one question that I can talk to, which is does your pattern library reach every touch point, social channel, prints, stores, etc.? That's a really interesting thing, which was on my final slide. My open question itself is, are there creative guidelines? So ASOS is a pretty large company, and there are lots of teams working in digital and in design. So we represent a portion of that. When you look at the marketing effort that's going on, they have their guidelines as well. So that's an ongoing project, and our ambition is not for this style guide to inform our print work or our posters, etc. But certainly it's made us able to have a better conversation. So if you go to someone with a bunch of sketch files and a bit of code, it's quite difficult to call up. The conversation runs quite slowly. But if you go to the creative team to kind of design marketing materials, and you have something you can point at, bring up the URL, and they can look at in advance of the meeting, then you can have a much more informed conversation about where the overlaps are. So that's it's not for us to inform that, but it's made much easier to work together. I'm going to let Theo speak to one, although he doesn't know what the question is yet. Theo, there's a question here which is why use Zeppelin and not InVision? I know that wasn't your decision, but
no. Well, I guess Zeppelin's been around enabling us to create inspectable style guides much longer than InVision. InVision have primarily, I think, focused in prototyping, and only very recently they've been stepping up their game. They're doing loads of content for us as designers to digest and learn, and now they're deciding to look at the Zeppelin side of things. It's timing, really. Whether we move over to InVision or not in the future is another question.
So they've upped their game since we really took this on. We invested in Zeppelin. A little while ago, and InVision definitely got their game since that's happened. But again, it's a very think of things at a very kind of atomic level rather than so InVision's the tool that they use is Inspect. Is that right? So it's thinking of things at a very atomic level. So there's, even if we did use that, there's still a part of the story getting lost, which is the top-down level, kind of the principles. And to speak to another question here, I guess just to wrap up, is how much work involved in going from Sketch to Zeppelin to a living style library? How much work is there in that? And how does the message not get lost in the chain? We're all going that with our eyes open, and it's a very difficult process to do. It does have to be manual. The idea that we work in Sketch, press a button, it fires off to a team who then create the React code around that, and then it's suddenly in this lifestyle code, is never going to happen. It is definitely going to require manual intervention. So the tools of choice, whether it's Zeppelin or InVision, I think is less priority than us being kind of tight on that process. I was going to speak to that. So I'm aware of the time. I think we've done our bit. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand over. I think it's pizza first. Is that right? Yeah, pizza first. Thank you very much.